So, I mean, going back to when I started, it's a completely different industry to the one I recognised. But essentially, the ethos and what we're trying to achieve was still delivering an excellent customer service to customers. The technology and the advancements that the sector has done has been phenomenal. But I think since COVID and what you mentioned, the start of hybrid working has accelerated the industry at a pace that we couldn't have imagined before the pandemic happened. And I think what also has fell out of it is candidates' expectations and talents' expectations of what a job role should be. And that it's really challenging times now for businesses to try and catch up with what a candidates' expectations are, because people are used to having time at home with their family and with their dogs. And traditionally, the contact centre was very rigid, had to be in the office. And now we've got the beauty of hybrid working, but I don't think we've quite got the balance quite right yet, but it's definitely heading in the right direction.
Welcome to Talk Time with Max Contact, your go-to podcast for everything contact center related. Join us as we dive into the incredible world of contact centers and explore the latest trends, innovative strategies, and cutting-edge technologies that are reshaping customer interactions. In each episode, we're joined by industry experts to share their practical insights and advice to elevate your contact center performance. Whether you're looking to enhance operational efficiency, improve team management, or understand the impact of AI in contact centers, you're in the right place.
When it comes to kind of managing remote workers, and I'll give a direct example here, not having that line of sight can make things pretty difficult for both the staff as well as the management. You're not hearing those intra-day, intra-call comments, phrases, whatever the case may be. You're not hearing when Suzanne starts to raise her voice a little bit and going, oh, you get that meerkat moment of, I need to just, nope, that's fine, it's dealt with. You lose out on that. How do you continue to ensure customer excellence in that environment, given that you lose some of that line of sight, that there is no kind of working around?
There's a lot of key metrics. There's customer feedback, survey, things going on. You've got managers who regularly listen to your agent calls at random, which I think is key. Don't just go pick the ones that you like, pick at random, listen to some real thing. But you'll be surprised with the live desk. You get that virtual same thing. And because there's a mixture in the live desk, it's not just management, but it's actually agents who have elevated themselves and become very knowledgeable. They'll become what we call support workers, lead agents. There's lots of different names in the industry for them. And they're actually on a shift purely to help answer questions, not even to take the calls. So they'll automatically keep the social interaction going. And they will spot stuff like that. And they will raise it to us to say, wow, Jenny put her question all in caps. Now, that might have been a pure mistake, or Jenny might be generally frustrated in caps and going, well, someone answer my question. So we'll pick up on cues like that. And you will also see it in the social chat, especially. And that's why we're all trained to watch the social box. So when you're on that shift and that live desk, you're not meant to be doing anything else but supporting that desk. That's your primary focus for the day. And that's because there's so much going on there that you need to keep you aware of. And one of those key things will be you'll see someone in social, really terrible customer. Well, the guys are trained very well. If they see that straight away, bang, from the live desk, you can go straight into a Teams room. Walk them off into Teams room, get them on the camera. What's up? Give you a breath, give you 5 minutes. What happened? Come on. And it's that reactive, like you say, you've got to be very, very, almost more visual in a virtual environment, because you've got to look for those little things. But the guys, once you've been doing a couple of years, you can naturally start to do that. You naturally start to pick up on little things that you wouldn't know. Maybe an email's written in a different tone than that person would normally write the email. There's another spot check for you. Now, I don't think you're going to catch everything. There are going to be times, open honest, does slip through the net, and then we have to pick that up and deal with it accordingly afterwards and try to find a better way of doing things. But, these things like this enhanced live desk and these teams, these are all things that companies learn as well over the years. Let the people on the floor have no other responsibility but to watch that. Let them spot the little things that might need attention.
Absolutely. And one of the aspects that I've spoken to previously and something I'm incredibly passionate about is what I call the cohort effect. That sense that when you're sat next to a colleague and you do hear them kind of beginning to get into that space where it is very difficult and it's obvious, whether that's the nature of the content of the call, whether that's the tone of voice, you inherently struggle to do that in a hybrid environment, particularly when you can't see people. And I think the idea of having that space, particularly where it's engaged with, I think that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, no disagreement for me at all on that one, Sean. it's not just that level, but it's also things that you will maybe when you sit next to someone and you'll hear them say a phrase a certain way or address a point, you think, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to try to do it next. And you're right. We do lose a little bit of that. So what we always try and do is when we do our coaching sessions, I actively promote this in my team, is get permission and play someone else's call. Yep. So if you find Sally done a great way of doing that call, get permission, use it in the other one-to-ones. Here's an example of Sally on the call. Yeah, what did you pick up from that? And when I used to be a team leader, it was one of my key tools. At the end, I'd say I want 3 things that you've picked up from that call that you're going to try next week to see if it helps you. And then we'll catch up next week and see if it did help you. Because you're absolutely right. And I acknowledge that I've worked in call centers for a long time. And you do make a lot up for just sitting in your team and listening and engaging stuff. And I think that's part of a much bigger question because as we know, technology is moving on at such a rapid speed. Hybrid/remote is probably going to become the absolute norm as we just have all these new technologies that we can use. I don't know if the traditional, don't want to get shot for this conversation. Some people probably shoot me, but will every day, Monday to Sunday, traditional brick and mortars be the right way forward? I'm not convinced. I'm thinking hybrid and remote are definitely in the future. And we see that a lot of companies opening up to that idea now. And so these are the big questions that we've got to keep discussing. Why do we keep these things going? How do we keep social interaction? Because we as human beings are very, very sociable creatures. We do have fantastic solutions in the company. Doesn't give 100% on what they need. Depends on the individual. Some people are not designed for remote working. And what we find is a lot of those will leave, but when you catch up with them in the future, because you do tend to pick a lot of friends in my company, 99% of the time they're in a hybrid role because they want the best of both worlds. There's certain people who hybrid just fits like a glove. That's exactly what they want out of life. And those are the guys I was with, something, nearly 9 years. Some of the people in there being 10 years plus. Some people don't stay. Some people try it out and go, that's not for me. But it's one solution. I'm not saying that the solution, it's a solution for people out there that if that's what they're looking for.
No, and I completely agree with you. I think that for the right person, hybrid or remote working can be an absolute godsend, particularly if there's shift flexibility and all of those good things that you can enable and facilitate that work both for the business and for the individual. I think that that's phenomenal. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, that I've got some friends who work for kind of a number of companies who do work remotely. And I won't say it's a trend, but it's something I've heard often enough that there's some weight to it. And that's that home working can blur the boundaries between work and personal life. And I suppose trying to address a work-life balance for remote employees at all levels of a business, like the computer stares at them from behind the office door. And it's things like people often have Teams on their own phones or email coming to their own phones. And how can you extricate yourself from the office environment whereby, for example, the boss or other people in the business are sending emails at 8, 9, 10, 11 p.m. at night or dropping updates in at midnight in whatever platform it may be? I'm fortunate enough that I work where I work. We don't have that problem to a huge extent. And there are times when actually, no, you do need to have that awareness because there's some event or something happens. But I have heard from a number of people frequently enough that it's raised it in my mind to ask. And I just wondered what your take was on that. What advice would you give to individuals struggling with that aspect of remote work? And is there a risk of silently eroding the work-life balance inherent in observing office hours? Or that there are staff completing hero hours, impacting burnout?
Absolutely. I will also put my hands together. This is an issue, especially when people are new-ish to it. They do forget to turn off. And I think when you're in a position of senior leadership, you have to look for it and you have to shut it down. There's responsibility in me as well. If I'm drafting an email, I'm not going to send it at 9 o'clock. I'm going to save it in my draft because I know it's unfixed. I know there's some people that will go, hold on, what's that quick email, and pick it up. I don't want that. My advice, and there's actually a video of me doing this on YouTube. I was doing some videos for something. I was just team leader at the time, and I talked about it in this video. It is vitally important to have a separate space in your house. And I mean a separate space. You have to get to the mentality, when I open this door in the morning, I'm stepping into my office. When I close this door at night, I am done for the day. It's almost like I have left the building. Another little handy tip is put a recurring out of office on, not available between the hours of 6 and 8:30 in the morning. Make sure people get the awareness that if they send you an email that late, it's not getting responded to the next day. I'm very strict with it. I was very guilty myself of putting emails on my phone and Teams on my phone. And I'll just quickly respond. I've taken emails off. I will not have emails on my phone. My time's my time. I will keep Teams on because I have a social interaction with those guys as well. And as you all know, unfortunately, when you're in charge, you have to have some form of communication. They say, I'm really sorry, but this has happened and I have to jump in and get it resolved. But I'm quite strict with my time and make sure my team is strict with their time as well. The key thing for me is diary management. Everybody in my company laughs. If it's not in my diary, it literally doesn't exist in my universe. I will put things in like I'm working on admin time for there. I'm doing emails here. I am doing a meeting with this person here. And every Friday, I make sure I put in last thing on Friday, self-reflection. Look back at my week. Did I run it properly? Did I give myself enough balance? Did I do everything that I really wanted to do? Is there anything I would do differently the week going ahead? So to me, it's simple to say, not easy to do. Just be strict with yourself. Don't put emails on your phone. Just don't, because it will get you. Make sure you have a separate space with the door. It's important to me. When the door is closed, I'm in my office and the door is open, walking out of my office, closing that door behind me saying, do not disturb. I even got a little sign on my door for my kids. And it says, Daddy's doing admin, you can lock and come in if you have to. And there's one that says, do not come in, I'm in meetings. I just flip the little sign on the door so the kids know, all right, they're not knocking that door now because he's going to be eating. There's goods and bads. And I think with everything, you have to weigh up the goods, with the flexibility that you were saying. So once they do a micro-scheduling 30-minute slot, so they can really be very specific. I only want to work 2 till 3 and then maybe work 4 to 6 that night. Lots of freedom for them. For me, I try and plan my diary when my kids are coming home. I'm not pointing at all slot just so I can go and say, hello, how was your day at school? What did this at school today? Did that? Great, fantastic. Thanks for the update. They've had a little bit of interaction. Okay, off you go now. And when they were young, I'd make sure I put time, make them a snack. I'd make sure that diary was blocked out. Make them their snacks. It's an ever-evolving thing, but you are right. There's so many people that you said hero hours. I like that phrase because they think they're being a hero, but actually you're not. You're burning yourself out. I try and sit them down and go, do you remember why you wanted to do working from home? I wanted more flexibility. Right. Have you got flexibility at the moment? No. Oh, but this needs to get done. Okay. Did it really need to go? What would have happened tomorrow morning had you not finished that report? When was the report due? 2 days' time. So it didn't have to get done that night. But it's also, I think if someone is doing that, it's also very important to look at their workload. Has there been some upcreep or something happened that's causing them to have to work those extra long hours? Because realistically, they should be working, let's say your contract is 40 hours, they should be able to get everything done in that 40-hour agreement. We all know it's going to go up and down. It's going to be weeks where it's going to spike a bit more and lower. But if they're constantly peaking, why? There's a problem that needs to be looked into and addressed.
There is something of a cultural zeitgeist at the moment, certainly within the industry in which I operate, which is around employee engagement, customer experience, and the what some would, rightly or wrongly, call the fluffier side of the business. I get a sense that that's been driven by the events over the last 3 years since the COVID-19 pandemic hit and we moved to a hybrid model office and many more people working remotely. Is that something do you feel that's a fair assessment? What would you say to that in response?
It's a really interesting point, and I've given this some reflection in the past because I think there's probably 3 parts to this. The first part is one of the things that COVID has done in terms of empowering employees is it's helped people to realize that the old ways of working that were often we were just told that's not possible. COVID has now forced us to say, oh, actually, it is possible. If we wanted to let you work remotely or wanted to let you work hybridly, then some organizations could have done that. So that's kind of pulled back the veil of trust almost for employees to say, hang on a second, you told me that this wasn't possible. And then as soon as it's a necessity on your part, it is possible. What else is possible? So that has reduced, I feel, potentially some of the trust between the employee kind of psychological contract. The second part is employers have not always been the quickest to respond to change in the macro environment. It doesn't matter what the situation is, but there's almost a revert to type mentality that happens after any major change. So for me, there's an opportunity that COVID's presented that hasn't been there before. So pre-COVID, organizations have a huge amount of data that says Danny performs at this level when he's in the office. We now have a second data set that says Danny performs this way when he's not in the office. So if we wanted to, we could be very smart in comparing what environment and what context suits Danny as an individual and encourage him to do more work at home because you're better there or work, etc. Instead, we're seeing that revert to type mentality of everybody back to the office or everybody back to the office 2 days a week or just these departments back to the office. And I think there's a real opportunity to use that insight a little bit more scientifically to drive the decision making, because at the moment, with that lack of trust in the employee-employer psychological contract, the way that the message is kind of percolating across to your people is presentee is important. We don't really trust you to work at home. We trusted you when it was a necessity, but now you need to come back. And that's incredibly damaging. And there's so much more we can do. And the third point is it's a very privileged position. 82% of UK businesses and UK employees cannot work remotely at all. But this conversation has dominated the headlines. It's all over LinkedIn. It's on HR magazines. So it's a very privileged position that now that it affects kind of white collar workers, it's all over the airwaves. And I think we also need to be careful that when we're engaging our employees, 82% of them do not have the ability to work remotely. So what are we doing? Are they getting lost in the kind of melee of all this news? And what are we doing to make sure that they are still strategically aligned to what we're trying to achieve as organizations?
Understood. So let's take it back to our hypothetical.
There's a lot there, Sean. We'll let that simmer.
Yeah, I need to digest that one.
Quick one. Employees don't necessarily trust as highly as they did. Employers are still a bit stuck in the past. But most of our employees, it doesn't even apply to. They've still had to work and will continue to work non-remote.
Okay. So with that scenario, we've got a company X, whoever they may be, who have a clear goal and objective and a business directive that they want to achieve. They have an engagement or a culture that is at odds with that in some way, shape, or form. You mentioned earlier on at the start of our conversation around what one of my previous guests has referred to as nudge theory. So I just want to unpack that a little bit. And how do you go about doing those nudges, identifying which nudges to do, what small improvements you can make? Because any big seismic change, you can't turn the Titanic around without first lots of small increments. So where do you begin?
Stage one, as I alluded to earlier, is the leadership team. Let's go and see, because they're at the helm of the ship in your metaphor, they have the most influence over when and where the ship decides to turn. So do they have the right environment to allow for whatever behaviors we need, whatever structures and processes, etc., we need? And do we have them bought in so that when changes are made potentially elsewhere in the organization, they've got senior stakeholder engagement as well? So first stage is always within the leadership team. Second stage is then a bit of a finding mission of understanding what approaches do we have within the organization, bearing in mind the whole time that nobody comes to work wanting to do a bad job. So if things are happening that are misaligned, what is it that's driving that behavior? And quite often there's a couple of smoking guns that appear in most organizations that have these challenges. So first one is comms approach. So what is and isn't told? When's it told? What's the governance around it? Do we just tell everybody everything and expect them to pick out the bits that are important? Do we dominate with content rather than context? So do we explain why this message is important rather than it just being another piece of information? Second one is leadership approach, and that's both active leadership. So what are they physically doing, but also passive? What are they tolerating? What if somebody does a great job, does it get spotted? If someone's doing things that are aligned, does it get spotted? And the third one is reward. So what extrinsic motivations are being used? We know that pay is not necessarily a motivator. It's kind of a hygiene factor. But there will be other things. There may be bonuses, there may be share options, pensions, incentives, all sorts of stuff that may be encouraging behaviors that are supporting or detrimental to whatever that goal is. And there's a wealth of other things as well. So first stage, what sort of environment do you have in your leadership and where do you need to go? Second stage is what kind of environment, what things are encouraging your people today. Third stage is then understanding your people. So if we know, for example, most of our people are introverted, then if we're going to work on those reward and recognition programs, we know that big awards is not the right way to motivate or engage those particular cohorts. Similarly, if you were using something like Myers-Briggs and you identified that your people are very structured and stable and like objectivity, then your comms strategy, if that's where the investment is, can't be abstract, wishy-washy. It has to be purposeful, focused, etc. So understanding your people means that you can then, when you're building a roadmap to take these people from this environment to this environment, you can be very tactical on where to invest to get the most kind of juice from the squeeze, the most investment.
You've just said something that's really triggered the thought. And I suppose that's around knowing your employees, knowing your collective. You mentioned Myers-Briggs. I recall doing quite an in-depth personality profile at one of the businesses I worked at previously, and it was kind of taken aback by how in-depth it was. And I remember that being quite transformative on a one-to-one basis with people that I interacted with. Are you an advocate for things like Myers-Briggs for understanding at a cultural level or a collective level what the predominant factors are across the employee base?
Genuinely fabulous question, because although I use psychometrics, you have to be aware of the blind spots that they provide. For example, if you use Myers-Briggs, identifies whether someone's extrovert or introvert, whether they're structured in how they organize, or if they see abstract patterns, whether they're a logical decision maker or a feeler. However, in the West, we have a bias towards wanting people that are friendly and gregarious and will shake everybody's hand, but also know what they're doing and are organized, but are emotive and in touch with their feelings. So if you're self-reporting, there is a bias for how you're filling it out as an individual. The second is the way that a lot of the statements are written in your results are a bit like a horoscope, but they can apply to more than one person. It's called the Forer effect. So am I an advocate of psychometrics? They can be a useful tool as one of your indicators. And I use Myers-Briggs and DISC and Clifton, etc., but generally on a wider population basis to say broadly are most of our people in this kind of cohort or this kind of cohort. If they're used individually, you need to temper what that insight is telling you because of the bias, because of the way that the kind of Barnum-Forer effect reads. Yeah, so I don't take it as gospel. Certainly do not recruit based on it. Do not plan people's path through life and their future career steps based on whether you think they're a D or an I or whatever it might be. That's a recipe for disaster.
I know that you've been working on a white paper, which is the hybrid working standards for hybrid customer service. So first part is tell me a little bit about that. But then I'm going to switch it up a little bit and just ask, how on earth do you achieve what we've been talking about in terms of community, both from a customer, but more so from an employee point of view, in a hybridized environment or where you've got a multi-channel environment? So those are my two questions, and I suspect they'll feed into each other.
So most people that know me know that I've been involved in hybrid working right from years ago. And obviously it kind of all came to the fore over COVID and got a lot involved there working with different teams over the 2-year period. And what was really clear to me is that in order for hybrid working to work, organizations need to have very clear standards that are very well articulated, very well understood. And what's happened is that people went into COVID in a firefighting mode, and many organizations are still firefighting. They haven't changed the model to say, this is BAU, this is business as usual, this is how we're going to operate, okay? And it's time. Over the last 6 months, I would have thought I'd have seen more of it, but what people seem to be doing is really rooting in the firefighting mode that really isn't working for them. So it's about get the right model in place, right? But behind it and underpinning it are standards. What do you do about environment? What do you do about risk assessment? How do people work from home? What are the procedures around HR? There's about 10 different areas the standards that will actually cover, from leadership all the way through to issues like environment and risk, okay? So that's what it's about, just to give people a start point that says this is a bit of a blueprint to look at. I did a 36-point checklist right at the beginning of COVID, which is, I'm going to do the American plug, aren't I? You can get it on my website or you can get it on my LinkedIn feed, whichever you like. But the other side of it is around the second question was, how do you bridge the gap with the community?
Yeah, the second point was we talked about community and the importance of community within an employee work group within a contact center, intergenerational, cross-generational, going out and doing something in the community, but also simply being part and feeling that sense of community. How do you establish that, or what things can you do to establish that when you've got a hybridized workforce?
Right, sure. Beautiful question. I think there's 2 very clear answers to it. In fact, I'll give you the one answer. And the answer is you bring the customer in. So bear in mind, if I'm in an office, I've got to bring the customer into an office. It's so much easier to do. So how do I get the customer centricity into my staff working at home? Because if I'm going to be a customer-centric organization, think about it. I've got my friends and family employees working in front of a screen all day long, looking at processes, filling out forms, and looking at everything basically from a PC world. But they're not looking at the customer anymore, are they? So how I've brought customer centricity into my workplace, if I have at all, I've now got to innovate. And how do I bring customer centricity into my work environment when I'm at home. So let me just pick up a really simple thing that will work, change it around. Let's pick up something like team huddles. So team huddles over people working from home have just fallen apart. Some organizations are doing it, and they're lots of struggling with the how do I get people to turn a camera on, basic point one, through to how do I make it engaging, enlivening, and everything else. So how do I run a successful team huddle? How do I bring customer centricity into my team huddles to make that a real focus, rather than having the old command and control team huddle, which was, let's look at performance. We're not doing this. We're not doing this, right? You need to do this better, this better, this better. See you next week. I've got to make my huddles customer centric. I've got to be talking customer stories. I've got to be talking about customer compliments, customer complaints if I need to, and some of the things that we need to enhance and what they're going to do for the customer. So I need the people running my huddles to make sure that the language, the aids, the boards, whatever they're using are very much customer centric, not numbers, productivity, efficiency centric. So I've got to really think about one of the key tools that I now have in a hybrid world. How am I using that to bring my employees to line up to deliver around the customer? And I've got to do that day in, day out. That's a start point. So I'm redesigning how the leader works. I'm redesigning how the leader is functioning and what they're saying virtually every day of the week now, because the leader's role is to make sure what they're doing is bringing the customer to the employee who's now at home.
That's a really, really interesting way to frame that. It's one that I hadn't considered previously. And I think that that's kind of at the root of one of my last questions, because I'm conscious of time, unfortunately. And I'll just lead straight into that because it feeds into it. So you've written quite extensively on customer service. How have the traditional roles of customer service agents been redefined over time? We've just been talking about bringing the customer to the employee. And has that accelerated or even kind of decelerated in this post-pandemic firefighting world that we seem to be in at the moment?
So the role of the frontline person, the frontline employee, has just shifted again, hasn't it, under all of this? So, I think everyone knows now, everything, the world is more complex. We know digital is taking away all the transactional work. Thank goodness. That leaves me with my staff dealing with relationships, complexity, high emotive type conversations in an omni-channel world. And I'm doing that over the phone. I'm doing it online. I'm doing it through the web. So I'm doing it in a multi-number of channels. That is a distinctly different skill set to what perhaps many people were doing only 18 months ago, even 6 months ago. So I have to really make sure that I deliver that for my staff in terms of skills, in terms of tools and tech. But what sits over that is let's build a community to deliver that. Let's get our staff really engaged in building the future world of work. Well, let's understand what that advisor of the future is all about so that we can actually make sure we build it with them in mind and them at the heart of what we're doing, as long as it's customer-led, that we don't end up crawling up into our own internal workings again and being all about us, because that's not going to work. It's got to be customer-driven. So future is about, what is it? We're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about customer more, we're going to talk about community more, and we're going to talk more and more about hybrid. And those three things will be at the center of what a leader's doing. And all the other things about running the engine room, they still need to take place too. So this is, again, layered on top of what was going on before. And running the engine room, I now need to make sure I've got the right people in place with the right skills, the right tech to deliver consistently for my customers so that my staff can be kind. I think it's as simple as that.
When you look back at where the industry started and where we are now, we've kind of had this macro change over that period of time, but we've also had a much more recent, very kind of micro change that's happened in this post-COVID universe, post-pandemic universe with the likes of hybrid working. Would you agree with that? What kind of transitions do you feel that we've seen? I'll come to you first on that one, Julie.
So, going back to when I started, it's a completely different industry to the one I recognised. But essentially, the ethos and what we're trying to achieve was still delivering an excellent customer service to customers. The technology and the advancements that the sector has done has been phenomenal. But I think since COVID and what you mentioned, the start of hybrid working has accelerated the industry at a pace that we couldn't have imagined before the pandemic happened. And I think what also has fell out of it is candidates' expectations and talent's expectations of what a job role should be. And that it's really challenging times now for businesses to try and catch up with what a candidates' expectations are, because people are used to having time at home with their family and with their dogs. And traditionally, the contact centre was very rigid, had to be in the office. And now we've got the beauty of hybrid working, but I don't think we've quite got the balance quite right yet, but it's definitely heading in the right direction.
I agree with Julie. I think it's changed so much over the last 2 or 3 years with COVID. I mean, there were advances just generally, but it's changed so massively. And I'm not quite sure that everybody understands where we need to be or where we are. And it's still at the heart of it is the people. And if you create a great environment for your people, it works for your customers as well. And if we keep those two things in mind, I think it'll just keep going in the right direction.
I completely agree. And I think it is interesting that if we think back to a pre-COVID universe, if you'd said to anybody in the industry that you can run a successful contact center with having very few staff in an actual office building, I think you probably would have been laughed out of the room by 90% of companies because the belief just wasn't there. And it wasn't until companies had to do that actually the realization happened that, okay, you actually can do that. And I think that that's been very much transformational. I'm going to come back to you on something you mentioned, Julie. You talked about you felt that the hybrid model, and I believe there are a whole range of hybrid models to kind of choose from, there's still some learning to be done there. Can you just unpack that a bit for me, please?
I think we've gone a full circle of getting our people home. Now we want them back. And now there's the element of presenteeism creeping back in. There's also purposeful presence to be considered. A lot of people have now got a lot more in their day. They're used to not having the daily commute. They don't want that wasted time. They want to get home and go to the gym or walk their dog. So it's the candidates are almost driving what businesses are having to do now. And I don't think everybody's quite got it right yet, because we're still in a bit of a trial situation of this. We haven't been in this situation before. But what we seem to be losing in the contact centre environment is that with the hybrid working is the sense of working together as a team, the collaboration days, the idea sharing of being together as a team. And what a contact centre is all about was very good at being a team. And I think some organisations have lost that along the way. Some are doing it really, really well. But I think policies are just adapting as we go along. It's not this policy is going to last for the next 2 to 3 years. I think all businesses are starting to adjust it every few months. They're doing pulse points with their people, checking in with their people, seeing if it's working. We're also seeing huge problems with mental health, the rise of awareness around neurodiversity. There's so many different things to consider, and it is a learning curve for businesses. It's a challenge.
I think the heart of it is businesses and organisations being flexible. I think we're moving away from that term about hybrid, and it's about flexible working. And there is a move to wanting people back into the offices, but it's how can you do that and still maintain some level of flexibility for people that's lives have changed a little bit. And I think people are a bit worried about coming back in case they lose that flexibility. So the more that organisations invest in those policies around flexibility and supporting colleagues, so that if they want to go to a school play or pick the kids up from school or walk the dog, as Julie said, or go to the gym, the organisations are trying to work around that. We've seen some great examples with some of the customers that we're talking to around purposeful presence. It's a mouthful, that, isn't it? But about when you do come back to the office and you're in the office doing those great stuff around people and engagement and working as a team and collaboration, all of that really good stuff as well. So I think if organisations can nail that flexibility piece and then make it purposeful when they're in organisations, that's perfect.
Great thing to come out of it has been the elevation and of the importance of resource planning in this as well, because all of these changes that are shifting, they've probably undergone the most change during these last few years, but will continue to do so as we decide what is right for each organisation. So it has propelled them into the limelight, I guess. And I don't think it's finished, especially with, I mentioned earlier about the rise of neurodiversity. What we're seeing is a lot of organisations are having to adapt even further now, because having people at home during COVID, their normal coping strategies have completely changed. And coming back into the office and into the workplace, people are struggling with noise, they're struggling with people around. It's not just the fear, the anxiety around COVID's gone, but actually their coping strategies have changed yet again. So we've got some various different things at play.
I think that's a really good point. Being familiar with some of those elements in my own friend group, I know things like masking can be a real challenge for people who are having to integrate back into the office environment. And on the flip side of that, there's been that absence of the support structure that you get within an office environment. But I remember when I was on the phones, when I was sat talking to a really challenging customer, and my colleagues around me would hear the tone of the conversation. When I finished that conversation, they'd be like, "You handled that really well. Are you okay?" You'd have those micro check-ins, almost like nano water cooler moments that helped strengthen the team. And then we went obviously to the remote universe for the necessary. And then coming back to this again, it's actually remembering that there are huge values to be had from being in an environment like that. But again, as you say, it's around finding that balance that works for the majority as much as possible.
Thank you for tuning in to Talk Time with Max Contact. We hope today's discussion has sparked new ideas to help you advance in your contact centre. To learn more about any of the topics discussed in this episode, visit www.maxcontact.com. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a rating on your favourite streaming platform to help other like-minded individuals join the conversation. Also, stay tuned for our upcoming listener questions segment. We'd love for you to participate and share your thoughts. And remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a future episode. On behalf of everyone at Max Contact, thanks for listening.